It's Create Day. For this project, I'm going to be using these wood rounds from Hobby Lobby that I got on clearance for $1.99, originally $8. This one I've already chalk painted white, and I went ahead and clear coated it with my flat spray paint. It's kind of scratched up. I originally did this several months ago for a fall project, but once I had it painted like this, I was like, oh my gosh, that looks like a Christmas ornament. So that's what I'm going to be doing. This is kind of a mixed media project, so I've got lots of things I want to use. I have a little deer wooden cutout ornament that I had to fill the hole with some wood filler. I got that off of Amazon. And one of the base things that I want to do on here is this vintage paper that I got from Amazon. I am super impressed with this stuff. It comes in a 6-pack of different vintage style papers. They are all absolutely beautiful. You get 180 sheets total for like $16. And I mean, there's music paper, there's Victorian paper, spring vintage paper. Like it's just really incredible. Very happy with this purchase. Then I also want to do some texture paste. So I've got some stencils of snowflakes, and on this one I want to use the stars. And I just got these off of Amazon. I haven't used them yet, so I don't know how good they are. We'll find out. And then I have this chipboard that I got off of scrapbook.com of the trees. I'm going to put those on here somewhere. And I have a brand new IOD stamp that I have not used yet. This has all kinds of textures on it. And I'm thinking this one, I just think that would be a nice, like it's kind of twiggy looking, you know, like this is going to be kind of a winter forest look. So I'm probably going to use that as well. And from there, I don't know where this will take me. It will just come to me as we go. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm starting with the vintage papers that I showed you. I like having an organic torn edge as opposed to a straight line. So I'm, with the aid of some water on a paintbrush, I'm just ripping around the edges. And then I do the same just in random spots to make smaller pieces. Now I'm using my Distress ink in Antique Linen color and just brushing that around the edges to blend the colors and get rid of any of the white that might have been left behind when I tore the pieces. Now I'm laying down my pieces of paper so that I can see where I want to decoupage them on. I just want to do approximately half of this circle. And so I laid them out beforehand, and then I just start applying my Mod Podge onto the back of each strip and placing it on. I let it go over the edges because I can sand that off later. You can see that I'm just placing them randomly around, overlapping them. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. You just lay them out so that you get the coverage that you want. Once I had them all glued down, I just went out with this little scraper thing to get out any air bubbles. And now I'm using medium brown paint to go in around those edges and then blend that out onto the rest of the board. I didn't want there to be a really stark contrast between the darkness of the papers and then the white that was on that board. But this will just be the first of many layers of things on here. So now I'm dabbing off the excess with a paper towel so that I don't have a lot of brush strokes. The next thing I want to do is use my IOD texture stamp. So since this was brand new, I went over it with a little bit of fine grit sandpaper. It primes the stamp for the first time that you use it. And now I'm going to use StazOn ink in jet black for this stamp. I'm just covering my stamp with the ink, and then I will turn it over and place it onto my wood round. And I will just do this 4 times to cover the entire piece. Not particularly in a pattern, just kind of random. You won't even see most of this when it's all done. There'll just be little bits and pieces poking through that add some visual interest and dimension. Now I'm just painting my chipboard trees and my little wood cutout deer with white acrylic paint. Just kind of a light coat front and back. And now that our Mod Podge is all dry, I'm just using my sanding block to remove the pieces of that paper that were hanging over the edges. So now I have dark blue, white, and coastal blue that I want to mix with some water and blend like some white into the blue to lighten it up a little bit. And I'm just putting this on more like a wash so that you can still see some of that background coming through. This top half with the blue will represent my sky for the scene that I'm creating. And here's where I'm adding in that coastal blue. I just wanted to create some more variation in my colors of my sky. These are some little rubber holiday stamps that I picked up at Michael's. I'm going to be using some of them to make an impression onto my air dry clay. I roll out my clay. Honestly, I did not make sure it was even all the way around as far as the thickness of it. And so these all turn out a little bit different, but that's okay. I really like the rustic look of that. But I just take the rubber stamp end that you would normally use with ink and just press it down into that clay without going all the way through. I did these little poinsettia ones too, but I ended up not using them. So now I just took one of my clay tools and I just carved around each of those little squares, leaving a little border around the word. Once I cut around those, I just remove the excess. and then you can go around the edges of each one with a little water on your fingers and smooth out the edges. Next, I wanted to make a little star out of clay, but I didn't have a mold or a stamp. So I just took this rustic metal star that I had and pressed it down on there. And then I was able to just cut around that with my clay tool. And here's where I found that if I put my tool in water, it made a much smoother cut onto my clay. And here's how this little guy turned out. The only downside was there was a hole in the star to hang it with, so that came through on the impression. But I found a way in the end to camouflage that, so it turned out okay. Then I just smoothed down the edges like the other pieces with water on my finger. Now I'm going to use some chalk paste in vintage lace to make some snowflakes and stars in the sky area of this piece. I did have a little bit of difficulty. I think the tool I was using wasn't the best for this. I should have had something that wasn't as flexible. But I also didn't tape off any of the areas that I didn't want on there, and I was working in such a small confined space that I think it could have gone a lot easier if I had planned better for this. I did get some smudging a couple of times, but I'm able to remedy that for the most part, and ultimately they look okay. If it's, see, like there, the stencil moved. Well, it didn't move on its own. Obviously, I moved it, but accidentally. So there were just some problems, but worked through it, and it turned out okay. And before I paint the bottom half of this, I want to put some snow-like texture on with that same chalk paste. So I'm using my little plastic spatula, I guess that's what you would call it, to just kind of make some almost like hills and valleys type of thing, just to add some like more definition, like not just a flat piece of ground. It's actually got like little hills and valleys in it. And then I decide to go ahead and do that texture paste around the entire edge, not going over the side, but just along the front edge. Once that was dry, I took my white acrylic paint, added a little bit of water to it, and started to fill in between all that texture paste. Just trying to get the consistency that you could still kind of see through it. And so here I'm just blotting some of the excess off because I want to make sure that I don't completely cover all that background that I did. So it just, a little trial and error, see what how much water I needed to make it still kind of see-through, but still have a lot of coverage on it at the same time. So now I'm mixing my blue and my white again, and watering it down considerably because I want to do a wash over the snowflakes and the stars, because I don't like the stark white. I want it to be more muted. So I'm doing a wash over this, and then I can go back over because it's because they're all that texture paste, I can go back over kind of like a dry brush with the white to just like highlight them and make them visible, but not so front and center. So I know it probably seems like pointless, but this is just how I do stuff. It's why make it easy when it can be hard? So then I did go over the bottom piece again with some watered down white paint. I just had a little bit too much of that background showing through. So on to a mold for the top of my ornament piece. This is an IOD mold called Olive Crest, and I'm just using this one little arched piece. When it comes to this, you always want to put some cornstarch down in your mold first, and it'll help release it. And then these can be glued down onto your surface while they're still wet so that you can get them to the right shape that you want. And then once they're dry, you can paint them. And I've also heard that you don't even have to wait for them to dry to paint them. So I'm just going to go ahead and glue mine on with some tacky glue, turbo tacky glue. And that way I can kind of conform this a little bit to fit on this the way I want it to. So now with my white acrylic paint, I'm going to go ahead and do that dry brushing that I was talking about on the snowflakes and the stars. And now these are raised, but they're not raised much, so you really need a very light hand and a small brush. And so here I'm just painting all that texture paste with my white acrylic paint. So now I'm going to be blending together some hunter green and olive green for my trees. As you can see, I don't completely mix the colors together to make one uniform color. I kind of leave them just roughly mixed so that I'm getting both of those colors in on the trees in different areas. To me, it just makes it look a little more natural. Then towards the end, you can just kind of dip into one color or the other if you need to add a little more shading. And now for some espresso bean brown for the trunks of the trees. I do this more kind of a streaky paint technique than like a solid color. I just think it looks so much better this way. It looks like some of the bark has come off in areas, and I don't try to go up all the way into that tree with that. I just go as far as I can get to, and then I let the rest of the branches just take over from there. Now I'm going to paint our little buck. So he's going to get linen, nutmeg, and honeycomb. I spritz a little water and dab it off on the end of my brush so I will just have a little bit more of a flow with these colors. I'm doing the antlers in linen, and I'll do his little tail that same color. For the body, I'm just going to kind of mix these colors up as I see fit and just put them on there in a very loose fashion, no rhyme or reason, no pattern, just until I think it just has enough variation in it that kind of looks like fur, or at least that it looks like the color that his fur would be. Is it fur or is it hair? Like, I just realized I don't know that. Do deer have fur or do they have hair? God. Guess I should do my research before I start blabbering on a tutorial. But I do think it could probably be called either one. So anyway, in the middle of all this, I have painted his hooves the darker brown color, and now I'm just going around the outer edges with that same darker brown, and I also did a little bit of brown on his nose. And so now I'm just touching up the antlers and his tail. Now I want to add some snow to my trees. So I have some Mod Podge, and I'm just going to brush this on and then sprinkle on and press down into the Mod Podge my fake snow. I shake off the excess and then I will set it aside to let it dry. Now my little clay squares are all going to get a coat of white acrylic paint. So now I have these paper poinsettias that are pretty small, but I don't want the dark red color, so I'm giving them a coat, actually 2 or 3, I don't remember, coats of the white acrylic paint because the red bleeds through and they look pink, which a little bit of pink is okay, but I wanted them to look more white than pink, so it did take, I can't remember, 2 or 3 coats. Now I'm using an iridescent top coat called Enchanted Shimmer. I will go over all my stars and my snowflakes, and I end up using this on the snow and on my poinsettias as well. I did a second coat of white acrylic paint on my little blocks, the star cutout that I did, as well as the molding that I put at the top of this piece. Finally, it's time to start gluing down some of our embellishments. So with hot glue, I'm attaching my buck and both of my trees. Now, unfortunately, with my trees, I did not measure twice and cut once. I should have stepped back and made sure that they were straight before I picked them up and glued them on. So they are a little slanted. And here's where I'm just going to use the Enchanted Shimmer on my snow. Now I'm just going to use my shimmering silver metallic paint to cover the what would be the top of the ornament, the hanging portion of it. And I end up painting this around the entire perimeter of this piece. I painted the molding silver as well, but I did not like it, so I ended up changing that. And I went ahead and painted the star the silver as well. I decided to go with Holiday Red for the molding at the top because that's the color I'm going to be using on the lettering in my little blocks, and I thought it would just be nice to tie all those things together. So with a very fine brush, I'm going in and attempting to paint the little tiny letters of these words. Now with my Mod Podge, I'm going to apply some crushed up leaves and some pieces of twigs. I spread out some of the Mod Podge and then sprinkle the leaves on there. I ended up having to kind of press them in and then take my brush with the Mod Podge on it and kind of, push them in with that and go over it to get them to stick. And with the twigs, I actually had to use hot glue. The Mod Podge wasn't strong enough with the little bumps and grooves and whatnot that were in the twigs. So I ended up using hot glue for that. And then once all these leaves were in place, I went over with some more Mod Podge to kind of seal them in so they would stay on there. Now I want to do some antiquing wax onto the molding and onto my little blocks. But in order to control it better so that I don't get it too dark, I'm going to apply some clear wax first. I'll be brushing that on and then wiping it off with a rag. And then I can go in with my dark antiquing wax, brushing it on and wiping it off. And it just gives me a little more control so that I don't get things too dark. So here I am just wiping off that first coat of clear wax. And now I'm just doing the same thing, doing a coat of clear wax onto all my little blocks. And so here we go with the darker antiquing wax, just brushing it on and then wiping it off. And now I'm just applying that antiquing wax to my little blocks. I'm also applying the antiquing wax to my little silver star. And this is just where I'm wiping off that antiquing wax from the molding. And now I'm adding wax over the silver that I did on the top part of the ornament piece. And then wiping that off, so this will have a much more rustic look to it. And now I'm wiping the antiquing wax off of my little blocks. And they look really cute and rustic. And this is just my final coat of Mod Podge over the little pieces of leaves and twigs. For the poinsettias, I just wanted to add a little bit of silver to that little piece in the middle. And now I'm using my Distress ink in Vintage Photo to go around the edges. And now I'm just attaching our star with a little hot glue. And then it's time to add the poinsettias with hot glue as well. And now our little square pieces with our little rustic wording on them. It's finally coming together. Then I wanted to add a few little pine cones in. So I have 3 really small pine cones that I hot glue in place in between those 3 squares. So now I just wanted to do a little bit more of the antiquing wax around the edges of these pieces that have that already on there. So I'm going around the molding and around the star and around the little squares, just adding a little more depth to these items that already had that antiquing wax on there. And here's where I decide to do the silver metallic around the perimeter of this piece. I decided to paint the back side of those poinsettias, even though they were on the back. It just bothered me that it was so obvious that they were red and green before. So I just went ahead and gave them a coat of the white acrylic paint. And now I'm doing that enchanted shimmer on my poinsettias. I decided the pine cones needed a little splash of frost, so I'm just dry brushing a little bit of the white paint on there. And here's where I do the antiquing wax on that final perimeter edge of this piece. Brush it all on there and then just kind of wipe it back a little bit. And we can move on to one of the final steps. I'm just attaching a few embellishments to this mold on the top. These are like little twig looking things that have clear crystal squares on them that kind of look like ice. So I'm gluing one on either side, and then I will put some little sprigs of greenery in the center. So now for the final touches, I am going to add some of the fake snow to that star. Remember the spot that showed where there had been a hole in the ornament? I will strategically place some snow right there to cover that. And then I'm going to touch up my trees, I'm just using the decoupage to add the snow. I'm going to touch up the trees where I lost some of the snow off of them. I'm also going to add a little bit to my sky and to my pine cones and to my little buck. See, he's going to get like he's got some hanging out on his back there. So that just a few final touches and we will be all done. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.